Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ascension Sessions. I'm Cherie, your host, and I'm here today with Geraldine Orozco. We're back for more. This is part 2 of a 2-part series, and we just did another video the other night, so if you haven't seen that one, you might want to go back and watch it. We're live here in San Francisco at the San Francisco UFO CON, and Geraldine, thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's lovely to see you again and to have you here in person with us. And we just wanted to dive a little bit deeper into some of the topics that we didn't really get a chance to cover the other night. So as we go through this journey, we're going to get to know Geraldine a little bit more and hear more about her story and, you know, some of the really important topics that we both want to share. So
thank you so much for having me. Sure.
Yeah, of
so
course.
Great to see you here.
Oh, thank you. It's always, fun to be with you and to learn more about you and to share your story. So important. So thank you. Awesome. So I know we covered a lot of topics the other night, and I was hoping that we could just dive deeper into some of your experiences, and we talked about your philosophy or your concept on parasitic consciousness. I wanted to also cover how ascension plays into contact experiences, and I know that you have a lot of metaphysical training and you're a meditation teacher. And so I know that you're, very much into that reality as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's start with that. Like, how do you blend, or how do you think those two worlds meet, ascension and contact? And why are they important to acknowledge together? Because I don't see them as totally separate. Do you?
Yeah. No, and that's an amazing question. And it's so important that we start asking that question because... Yeah. What I've realized in my journey is that when you go deep down the rabbit hole of spirituality, sooner or later, you're going to be met with that extraterrestrial aspect of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And when you go down the alien topic or all of these topics of looking at interdimensional contact, you're going to be met with the concept of consciousness, which is where we meet at that middle point, that point of meeting each other is that consciousness that comes into question. How does it manifest itself and in which way? So for me, in my personal journey, I found that when I was, and we talked about this the other night, peeling those layers and deprogramming the aspects of myself, I found that when I got to that neutral 0 point, I discovered aspects of myself, and those aspects of myself were the extraterrestrial parts and many parts of ourselves, because we're multidimensional beings. Mm-hmm. So whether, and all of this information is basically programmed in the DNA, right? We are a holographic DNA system that basically we are holding on to. All our fragments are here encoded in every cell of the body. And it's when you go through this kind of healing, when you go through meditation and the deprogramming process, that's when you begin to access those parts of yourself and you open up that information.
So 2 questions.
Yeah.
I'm hearing that the DNA is stored both in the body and in the holographic spirit or the soul or the non-physical parts of ourselves. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So really how it works is the DNA part of it is really the physical, the 3-dimensional plane. It's a holographic projection of a fractal of infinite consciousness. The soul is infinite consciousness. And so when that infinite consciousness is fragmenting through dimensions coming into this physical body, it organizes into the chakra systems, and the chakra system then feeds into our DNA system, which is connected to your ancestral network. And so that ancestral network is what's holding on to the information of, your ancestors, your mitochondrial lineage going down your mother's line and then your paternal line. And all that information is aggregate copies of cyclical information that we're kind of cycling through. And so as we were talking the other day in our conversation, how we come into those lineages is really important, because it kind of talks about that overall, the human organism, that vibrational signature will define what kind of experience you're going to be having.
Right.
So that's kind of the network. And it's important for us to know the structure of that, because then we begin to understand, how in the back end things are running, how consciousness is deposited, how it's changed, shifted, and how the body is also, it can be programmable, from that sense.
Right. And the other question I wanted to circle back to was, you mentioned that when you did your, deep meditations and your kind of introspective healing, and you were peeling back all the layers, you said that you found your alien, I forget exactly what you said, but like you realized that part of yourself.
Right.
So are you saying that in your meditative process, you had some sort of realization that you were a hybrid, or was that something that came out later after that first contact experience?
Yeah, so it came out after the contact experience.
Okay.
And it's very interesting because as I was peeling the layers, what I became aware of is my multidimensionality. That I realized that this physical body is nothing in comparison to what's within us, literally an entire universe, where we begin to question our origins, who we are, why are we here, all these basic questions that we hear in the spiritual community.
Sure.
But there's a process that gets you to actually ask those questions, and it happens when you begin to clean up all those programs. And what became, as a result of that, was, I believe, the contact experience. One night, just after working on myself, reliving that kind of experience, and I was introduced to the hybrid children. Of course, it was kind of like a leap of consciousness, from one day not even speaking the word alien to the next day, what did I just experience?
Right.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that for a moment. So you worked in corporate America, you had a normal job as a marketing and event planner, and then one day in 2013, was it? Yeah, you had an abduction experience where you were conscious, you were awake, you knew it was real, you knew it was happening, it wasn't like a lucid dream. And that's when your whole paradigm shifted, right? But it wasn't in that same experience where you met your hybrid children. That was later, wasn't it?
It was in that.
It was in that one.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
That's a huge point because, wow. So not only are you having to accept that you've been an abductee over and over again, but now here are your children, meet your hybrid children. How did you deal with that coming back to this 3D reality?
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's when the paradigm, my whole reality started to crack.
Yes.
Because it was like, wait a minute, where do these kids come from? And I mean, one of the most impactful things about the experience is when you see these hybrid children and you connect to them and you know that they are of you, they are a part of you. I see myself in them, even if they look completely different. They have like different, all this frail skin and different color and everything. I mean, you
Blue
know
eyes.
that they're yours. Yeah, very complex eyes, And so when you see them, there's an exchange, a telepathic exchange. And it was the first time in my life that I also experienced that telepathic exchange. And it's literally something is activated in your psyche, in your entire body, that opens you up to that kind of communication also.
Right.
So a lot of things are being ripped open during this kind of experience because it's so conscious and so real.
Right.
I'm being introduced to high technology, holographic technology within a craft. I'm being introduced to how they're functioning, their craft, or how they interact with each other on the craft.
Right.
These beings, they showed me these prisms that they would open up the most beautiful holographic projections of things of, my past in other alien lineages, what I'm supposed to be doing. And one of the impactful things that I was just having a conversation with someone downstairs, and this is why I love coming to these conferences, because you get to meet other experiencers that have experienced the same thing and don't know who to share it with, is an experience that right after I met the children and they were going to pull them away, I was just being taken back.
Do you have a sense of how long that meeting was?
Well, let's say this. I was taken at 3:33 in the morning and I came back about 6:15. Okay. So during that time, all of these things are happening here. And, as I'm being pulled away from them, I'm going into panic mode thinking, I'm supposed to take care of them. Am I going to come back? Because you immediately have this connection that's created with them. It's an emotional bond.
Right.
And they remove that feeling out of your body immediately. And they throw me into this kind of holographic nebula around me where they made me feel the most incredible peace and feeling of being individual, but at the same time completely connected with all living things, and not just on the planet, in the universe. So it's a feeling of, I guess, what some people can call that samadhi, that kind of, incredible pure bliss that I never experienced before in my life.
That's amazing.
And when they show you that, you no longer have this feeling of, the separation. The separation, it becomes a complete illusion.
Right. It's almost like they inject you with unity consciousness all in one fell swoop, right? In one moment.
Exactly.
So there's no need to feel anxiety or separation.
Exactly. And I'll never forget that. In my meditations, I aim to bring myself back to that moment of feeling that, and after, a lot of things changed. As I was mentioning, you're ripped open, you're activated in your psychic abilities. You have these new concepts, you've experienced something, a new paradigm of belief, of seeing things, and much more, my psychic abilities were activated. We talked a little bit about that last time.
In that same meeting.
Exactly.
That same
in this
initial.
Same meeting. Yeah. So it was really life-changing, because it was so vivid and so real. Yeah.
Right. Wow. And so, this whole concept of alien abductions, is really not in many people's reality. Yeah. Right? They don't want to believe it. They don't think it's real. They haven't experienced it themselves. And for me, I've known a little bit more about this topic than most people. So, I'm comfortable asking you these questions. And, one of the universal laws is free will, right? Like we all have free will. And so it makes me wonder, why do they think it's okay to take people and use their genetic materials to create these living beings, these children, hybrid children, without our consent? Because obviously you didn't know that you had these kids. This was the first time you were meeting them, but yet they're using your eggs to create these children. So do you think that they have a sense of entitlement over us? Like maybe they seeded us in the first place, or they've been messing with our DNA and our genetic material for years, centuries. So they feel some kind of entitlement, like, well, I'm just leveling up the species, if you will. Like we're just improving the human species, so it's okay. Or do you think that they know they shouldn't be doing this, but they're doing it anyways because they're trying to save their own species?
This is it's a huge conversation, and it's a controversial one because there's many ways of looking at it. For me, the way that I came across all of this information was diving deep into what was true, the ultimate truth for me, through my perspective, through my experience. And in my regression, one of the most impactful pieces of information that I came across was looking at the original lineages, the DNA that seeded life on this planet and the origin of life, the creation of maybe even this entire universe as an organism. And looking at that, seeing that, experience that, really helped me kind of look at a different way of looking at these kinds of exchanges that are happening with these interdimensional beings, these species. And one of those ways is, the concept of free will is so incredibly important and something that I'm very big on talking about, because there's layers to this. How do we become conscious? We, as this infinite consciousness, come and embody into this physical body, but we're coming into these, let's say, meat suits, right? Into this matrix, right? And we're playing out certain roles, but who created those roles? Who created the design of the life and this illusion, this beautiful world that we're living in? And I think that it's valuable to question that, because it really begins to create kind of an order of how we need to start questioning what we're experiencing here.
Right.
If there is genetic material being taken from our bodies in order to create other beings, that means there's thousands of worlds, thousands of species probably being created. And you have to think there are thousands of men and women around the world that are experiencing these.
Right. Just on our planet.
Just in our planet, the hybridization program.
Right.
Now, if we go back into history and we take a look at how our races were developed on this planet Earth, we're seeding from a very small group of genetic lines. I mean, that's just in our historical timeline. And, some people want to allocate that to the chimps and the apes. But we know now that, in our DNA, it doesn't match. There's missing information there. And they've only compared it to a very small amount of information that was matching with the apes. I mean, there's a large amount of DNA that they qualified as junk DNA, which hasn't even been looked at. And so right there, there's a tremendous amount of things that we don't really know about our own genetics. And so that's another thing that we need to take into consideration. So let's put that all together. We are these human beings experiencing, they're taking these genetic material from our bodies. So at what point does free will play a role? It's like the chicken and the egg. What came first? This creation of reality, the extraterrestrials that seeded life here, which would be us, or the consciousness? And the way I look at it is that infinite consciousness is really basically the fabric of everything, all things, whether it's these extraterrestrials, right? We talked about that, or, ourselves and all the living beings and the organisms on this planet.
Right.
So if we take that consciousness that developed into an organism that requires something to feed off, like a parasitic consciousness, like I was saying, it becomes individual. It believes that it's separate from that infinite consciousness. And so therefore it needs to create on its own in order to provide it not just purpose, but an identity, right? And those are just the laws of how consciousness function. And we know that because it's within us. Even in the way that we think about ourselves, these kinds of thoughts and programs of belief are encoded in our nature. It's the imbalance of the positive and negative, of the creative life force and the destructive life force, right? And so if we look at these kinds of ideas as the parasitic consciousness needing to feed off, we as these humans, these very complex, advanced biotechnology that is holding on to a fractal of infinite consciousness, are being utilized to create from that infinite soul more souls, which are also a combination of many genetics, many species, And what does that tell us? It tells us something. We need to learn about how DNA functions. DNA is a holographic storage system that is so massive that even here in Silicon Valley, we are desperately trying to mimic how DNA stores information because we're running out of space. And so just that way, this liquid form, in one little teaspoon, we can hold the entire historical timeline of the planet Earth. Can you imagine how much you have in your body? How much information is there? So these are interdimensional aspects of ourselves that we need to begin to be aware of. And they help us understand how the laws of the universe are actually functioning. Free will comes into play when you begin to look at how this infinite consciousness is fragmented in the physical body. Okay? If we are being put into cyclical patterns of behaviors and experiences based on our ancestral lineage, then there is some kind of organized system that is making sure that you as a soul come and continue to feel that, to experience those things. And so it's my belief that the soul has a choice. And the only way that someone becomes conscious is awareness. Consciousness is awareness, awareness of its own self. So when we're born, we come into the state of amnesia. We're not consciously aware. We're very consciously aware, but we immediately come into programs from the moment that you're in the gestation process in the womb. You're absorbing everything from your mother that she's feeling, thinking, and even the surrounding area, your father, your family around you, the lack of or, the presence of them.
And the DNA too.
Yeah, exactly. So all of that is being stored in the DNA immediately at conception, which is a really important element to the hybridization program, and which is why the hybridization program is carried the way that it is. Okay, either it's done through insemination, it can be artificial, it can be with another species, like an actual alien species, or it can be that they remove the egg and they do the insemination through a petri dish.
Right.
Okay,
right.
but each one of those different techniques is going to give a different product for the fetus that's going to be developed. And it has to do with exactly what we're talking about, the imprinting of information in DNA. Okay, so if the conception is done through love or something like that,
Sacred
then
union.
It's exactly that sacred union. It's the imprint is going to be different. Okay,
than if it's in a petri dish.
Exactly. If the imprint is done through something that is destructive or violating of the rights of this human, a woman, for example, which there are cases like that, it immediately creates a signature on that fetus. And so it really makes us kind of question, okay, what are these agendas doing then? The reason for them carrying out those agendas are maybe quite different.
And are there different species created that have different hybridization programs and they all have their own agendas?
Yes, I believe so. And but really we don't really know, see, because here's the way I look at it, and I've spent a lot of time like researching this and even listening to other experiencers that have these experiences. I hear everything across the board, from beautiful, incredible experiences with gorgeous, alien beings, right,
or
with
women.
the Nordics or whatever, the beautiful women. Everything to draconian experiences and even ritualistic experiences where, there are these kinds of complete infringement on someone's free will. Okay. So again, we live in duality. So we have a spectrum of possibilities that we can look at. But ultimately, we talked about, how does free will play a role? Free will plays a role when you, as the human, becomes aware of these things, and you can choose to either continue playing out those kinds of experiences or not. Okay, that's the choice that we have. But we only have that choice when we become aware of what's happening. That's why awareness is the key to playing out free will. So
do you think once you were aware of your experience, you had the choice to say, stop, I don't want to do this anymore? Yeah, and it's tricky. It's tricky, Cherie, because awareness, it's a constantly evolving process, right? It's healing and awareness. It's a lifelong thing. Because there's levels of awareness. There's levels and of what awareness. You're opening up to. Yeah. It was a nightmare discovering that, because you think you're done. You think you got it. And then it's like you enter another paradigm of belief, of possibility, even in those experiences. And so, I was just going to touch on the fact that, you said these multidimensional beings, right? Which really changes the way we label them and speak about them. And when we say alien, it immediately puts this definition of, I'm from here and you're from over there, and we're separate. And there's a lot of separation and duality in our society. There's a lot of us against them mentality in this world, especially in this country. And when you look at it from a perspective of like, well, we're all multidimensional beings and we're all holographic projections having different experiences, then you have to be open to the possibility that those multidimensional beings are here right now on this planet, in this room, wherever they want to be, right? And for some reason, we just can't see them or perceive them in this moment. So I know that's not always the case all the time, but that is the case some of the time. And I think that if you can look at it from that perspective, you start to open up to more unity consciousness. Absolutely. Of God, the creator, the source created all of these species. And we're all like playing different roles in different meat suits, if you will. Exactly. And and we all have different agendas, some good, some not so good. Right. But it's just another like perspective to be aware of, I feel like. It's so important. And I'm glad that you brought that up at this key moment, because
we help kind of bring full circle what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
I mean, these extraterrestrial beings, extraterrestrial means off planet,
Right.
but the way that we interact with them is interdimensionally, right?
Right.
We have to, because we're one dimension, they're another dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And so these beings, even the way the entire universe functions and moves is in this spiral form where we are constantly ascending.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the natural design of this organism. So we are always evolving. Mm-hmm. Everything is.
Right.
So even these beings have a structure of a certain kind of soul, which is some kind of fractal of infinite consciousness within themselves.
Right.
But if we look at the laws of consciousness,
mm-hmm.
what we understand is that when something becomes parasitic, it means that it has rejected its own consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it needs to feed off something else. It needs to, even its own ability to procreate has been disabled over the evolution of their own race for a reason. So it needs to come into question, how did these beings come to the point where they cannot procreate from that way?
Right.
I mean, it has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with the dimension in which they are, the structure of their organism, which has evolved for a reason in that way,
Mm-hmm.
But they do have a soul that is also evolving in a sense through their own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So all of us are going through this evolutionary process where we need to come into some point of ascension, and we're all somehow in some kind of a, if not reincarnation cycle, we're experiencing this dualistic expression.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's momentary, right?
Mm-hmm.
When any of those organisms become conscious of themselves, because even you and I, as multidimensional beings, we've had lives as Pleiadians, Arcturians. That's why we call star seeds,
right.
because we have our seeding of our past lives in other planetary expressions. And so all of that is in our DNA, which means we've been there. We've been in those other dimensions, maybe even carrying out the hybridization program ourselves. God knows.
Yeah.
So what that means is that as we're moving through these dimensions, through these expressions, we're just experiencing one thing collectively, and that's duality, the law of creation, which is what binds and keeps all of this organism, this matrix multiverse, thriving.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we talk about the ultimate point of coming into this unity consciousness, why? Why do we want to do that? Because what we know and what we feel, creates life organically, is the union of that divine masculine, divine feminine. When we come into integration of those two, that's when we can create. And that shows itself in the rebalancing of those two expressions, even within ourselves, even within our emotions, with what we're doing in our life, with everything.
Right.
That's the law of the universe, of creation. So unity consciousness means that we are now coming from that, the fragmentation. Let's imagine the white light going through the prism, creating the different rainbow rays. We are now taking those rainbow rays, going back to the prism to become that white light again. Right? And so that's the journey of the soul as it's going temporarily through this multidimensional matrix multiverse, which you're experiencing separation for a moment.
Right.
And that's the way I really would like people to look at things, as opposed to this separation. It's us against them.
Right.
It's not really.
If the or I don't know what to call them now. If these multidimensional beings are using us to procreate because they can't do it on themselves for whatever reason, intuitively I feel like it's because their bodies aren't able to, carry a baby the same way, say, a human could. But let's say they've become so evolved intellectually and spiritually, and they're of a higher consciousness, that they can't do that anymore. Their species would then just evolve. Wouldn't it go back to source eventually? And if so, then why is there this desperate need to keep their species going? And why are they using us just to do that in a desperate attempt to, keep creating their species, but they're not even recreating their species. They're creating a new species, right? Because it's half human and half whatever they are, depending on who's doing it. So that's like two questions.
Yeah.
It's like, why not just evolve or ascend back to source? You're close. You're almost there.
Yeah.
Why are they like grappling with this extinction possibility?
Fantastic question. And
Yeah.
within your question is really the answer, because it's that desire to continue their own race.
Right.
So themselves, their identities, their ability to create.
So even they can't see that they're trapped in this parasitic consciousness.
Absolutely.
And they're afraid to go back to source.
So again, it's that awareness, right?
Wow.
When we lack awareness, even ourselves, we behave parasitic all the time. Sometimes we don't even know it, but we're in these kinds of exchanges with people that are codependent or not loving of oneself or something like that, right?
Right.
That causes us harm in the long run, not just physically, but emotionally. Everything affects our entire creation and our ability to create. What happens to us as humans when we become depressed and feel hopeless and that we can't do anything? We can't create.
Yeah.
And our job is to create. We are built for creation. That's the design.
Yeah.
And so what's happening to these beings? They have, in another way, that same belief. And this is why we talk about that concept of separation. When you are separate from that infinite consciousness, you have rejected your own consciousness. So you need to feed off something else in order to keep you going. So this is the kind of basic design of these races right now. That's their conscious belief system and why they're carrying out these things. So how do you stop that? You become aware. And it's your choice. You can become aware or you can't. You can be here for centuries and lifetimes and billions of years, continuing the cyclical pattern. But have you ever asked yourself, and this is the question, right? So we incarnate into these bodies. And when we do, for those of us that have experienced past life regression, we tend to see certain trends in our lives. Repetitive lessons, repetitive patterns. And it's because we're looking at the psyche, which is being projected from the information that's within us. And within us is all of the expressions of all your possible lifetimes that you've had, with whether you looked green, blue, or you were a rock. Your expression, you have a certain thing that you're going to. Why? And why do you keep learning the same lesson? The lesson is always the same in this matrix. It's coming into that unity consciousness. It's learning how to embody that unconditional self-love, because that self-love is the awareness of oneself.
Right.
It's that consciousness. And so when we are not coming into that, that's when we come into that separation.
Right.
So in other words, and to answer the second question, I mean, what's happening here is they're utilizing the soul, when they take genetic material from the womb to create the hybrid, they're taking a fractal of your soul, because within your little DNA is encoded your soul as well. Right. And so when we interact with someone, we create cords of energetic cords, right? Me and you, everyone that's here, we create these energetic cords. And so in that same way, we are having cords that are being created to these hybrids and all living beings that are being taken as a part of ourselves. So take a look at that fragmentation that's happening to the soul. What better way to keep consciousness in this kind of cyclical pattern than to fragment it as much as possible, so that it would be really hard for it to remove itself from this kind of consciousness.
Right. So that's kind of scary, isn't it?
Kind of scary, but at the same time,
we don't want to keep being fragmented.
We don't want to be fragmented, and that's a choice. The important thing of this conversation is to know that you have the choice. And fragmentation, when does that happen? It happens every moment that you begin to feel helpless, when you go into, pain, suffering, trauma, which we need to relearn what that means. We're not talking about terrible experiences. We're talking about every moment that maybe someone gave you a dirty look and now you feel insecure. Just that moment.
Yeah, that tiny little moment.
Is a moment where there's fragmentation occurring within you. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
So how much fragmentation have we experienced throughout our entire life?
Yeah.
You know?
A lot.
So this is the thing, and this is where my work comes into play. DNA reprogramming is to deprogram all of those false programs to be able to come into this whole self.
Right.
And it happens on multiple planes. It happens in the physical, it happens in dream time, and it happens when you are about to leave the body, which is what the Egyptians have practiced and many ancient civilizations have practiced for centuries.
So if we come into the whole self and we can learn to love ourselves and have self-worth, is it fair to say then that when you transition and you go back to source, you can choose to stay there and not come back into this separation consciousness?
Absolutely. And it depends on the work that you've done in this small little time. Okay, the way I like to give you a little analogy, imagine a glass of water and you're a little fish that's jumping in and out of the water. Okay. Every time that you're in the water is when you're in the physical body, okay? When you're out of the body, that's when you have the choice. But during the time that you're in the water, you
mean out of the water?
Yeah, sorry. I messed up my own analogy.
That's okay.
Thanks for catching that.
When you're out of the water, like if you jump out of the water.
Exactly. So when you're in the water, it's like when you're during the death cycle. Okay, that's when you're traversing other dimensions out of the physical body. When you're out of the water, that's when you're in the physical body. You have that time. Just that time to choose what you're going to do with yourself in order to remove yourself completely from that glass of water. Okay. Oh,
wow. So is your point that it's a very small fragment of time?
It's a small fragment of time, but during this living moment of awake, we have the choice of becoming conscious. So you can either go back into the matrix and continue living this life of illusion and living from the first three chakras of sensation, feeling, emotions, or you can come into the higher, you can activate the higher aspects of yourself and begin to work on the soul work, which is to become aware on multiple levels and reincorporate yourself from those fragments.
Yes. Yeah. And then maybe even start to experience your multidimensional self.
Exactly. And the point of that is that you become so aware on multiple dimensions that when you come to the time that you're leaving the physical body in death, you then can choose, based on your vibrational frequency, based on all the work you've done all your life, to either come back and reincarnate into the reincarnation cycle or to experience something else. That's the choice.
And do you think there's a stop sign if you haven't worked on yourself or you haven't raised your vibration to a state of, a higher consciousness that says you need to come back and experience just one more time?
And those stop signs happening all the time as soon as we hit those roadblocks. I was talking in my presentation yesterday that, I was raised in, Catholic, and then I got all these cultures in my education, and I was in college, and then I got the job, and I was following everything that I was supposed to do in the matrix, to get where I was supposed to go. But I was still ridiculously unhappy, unfulfilled, empty. And it happens to all of us.
Right.
We come into that midlife crisis even where we're like, what the heck am I doing?
At 20. It happens at 20 now.
Oh, there you go. Exactly. Which is great. Thank God it's not happening later.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we come into these, and that's the stop sign. The stop sign is, hello, do you realize that, you have a choice? The free will question. Because the beautiful thing about that is that it's ingrained within us because we're infinite consciousness. And even in the womb, when the child is in the womb, when she begins to feel the negative emotions, they know that this is an imbalance. They know that it's not right. They know that it's off.
Who knows?
The us, ourselves.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So when we're first born, coming into the planet, we inherently know what is true, and what is true is love. It is that unity consciousness. And when we begin to feel the separation, we know that something is off.
Yeah.
And we experience this a lot with hybrid children. These very advanced children that they completely have a different way of thinking. They're no longer going by the norm, the structure of this reality, and they're here to create a new way of living, you know?
Do you think the hybrid children that are still up on the ships who haven't been integrated have the emotional capacity to like miss their mothers? Because I'm assuming that the multidimensional beings that are caring for them are not super emotional beings. Is that a bad assumption on my part?
Yeah, I don't know. No, I mean the thing is that you got to think about their technology is so advanced, right? And when you're in that plane, like on craft, I mean, don't forget, even when I was there, they removed me out of my emotions immediately. Okay.
Right, but was that technology or was that mind control?
Yeah.
Or was that because they felt compassionate and they didn't want you to suffer?
Well, that's a good question. The way that I experienced it is they don't want you to feel low vibrational frequencies, which are feeling helpless or pain or suffering, because it lowers the frequency. It just doesn't work. Their entire structure of the craft is a vibrational frequency. Right. They are a vibrational frequency.
Because it's a living craft.
It is.
Yeah.
This is how they move around. They're like these light beams, and that's why we see orbs and crafts in the sky that can move around the way they do. It's consciousness. It's aware. And so when you come into these heavier emotions that are only a part of the three-dimensional plane, it doesn't mix. You know?
So you're saying they don't really exist there.
In a way, they don't exist. You know, and they can experience a range of emotions too, but on very different levels. I mean, we're talking about structures of reality that we couldn't really quite comprehend,
conceive,
because our vision is coming from this, you know, limited dimensional plane.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense, or did you get an idea of what their agenda is with these children?
Yeah, and you know, there are several of them, and again, it has to do with how they're created, how the organisms are being seeded. It has to do with their race, but ultimately, as I was explaining, I think that the reason is for them to continue utilizing the soul to prolong this kind of the race.
Yeah.
The replication of the race.
So then I might have already asked this question, but obviously if you answered it, I didn't get it. So if these beings are higher dimensional beings and they're of a higher intelligence and they're at a higher frequency than us, why are they keeping this separation agenda going versus like having the awareness of the parasitic consciousness versus going back to source and having unity consciousness? Why are they perpetuating that instead of unity consciousness?
Yeah. So again, as I was saying, because they're not aware of their own parasitic need, you know, and they could be aware of it, you know, they chose to experience that separation consciousness. You know, they want to embody that. They want to feed off something. They want to keep themselves in the illusion of a creator, like a god. They're creating humans, they're manipulating the human consciousness, they're suppressing human consciousness on certain dimensions.
Right.
You know, and then they're utilizing these hybrid children for many different things. Some people say they're high vibration, and I know that some of my hybrids are more humanoid. They seem to me extremely advanced beings, and some of them are very low vibration, which are used for very dark agendas, you know.
Yeah.
The child is a pure form of consciousness. They come so awake. Their entire energetic body, their chakras are wide open. That's why from birth, from the womb up until the age of 7 is the most important time in raising a child, because that's when all their programs are being put in for their entire life.
Right.
So unfortunately, a lot of dark agendas on our planet, they know that very well, you know, which is why we have such terrible infringement on free will on children. We have the trafficking, the sex trafficking,
right,
and all of those things, especially on a child, when something like that is carried out, what happens to the soul is a powerful fragmentation.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah.
And so what feeds a lot of these beings, because they are this rejection of consciousness, is a lot of these lower vibrational frequencies. Okay.
So they're feeding off of those emotions.
They do. They feed off our emotions, lower vibration emotions, and they feed off a lot of some of these agendas also. And to hear that is sometimes very disturbing, because we're like, gosh, how could that be? But we just need to understand that there's duality. This is the dark side, and we see it in our own world.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we doing to fix that problem? Are we really taking that into our hand?
Yeah.
We even ourselves, we
agendas.
See it happen, and we don't really take as much action as we should. I mean, all of us should stop working, one day and then say, like, this has to stop. Right. Government or dark, whatever is doing this.
Right.
But we don't, so it's interesting. Our consciousness, we decide what we allow to happen.
Right.
And so if all of us would become aware, can you imagine? This entire planet
could shift overnight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what would happen is that because of that conscious awareness, it would basically dissolve this entire matrix multiverse, which is in a sense parasitic.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow. Do you believe there's a war between the dark and the light?
Yeah, that's.
And would you call it a
question.
war? How would you define it?
Yeah, I don't call it a war at all. I think that it's duality. It's basically the structure of our reality here. The structure of this, entire matrix multiverse is based on the law of three, of creation. You have the divine feminine, the masculine, and when those two unite, it creates. That's it. That's all we need to know. So within us, we have to integrate that darkness. What does that mean? That we need to be absolutely aware of our darkness. Even the most darkest aspects of ourselves, we have to be able to be aware of it and accept it, and acknowledge it, understand it, and not be afraid of it, because we understand that it's just a range of expression of ourselves. And when we do that, it no longer has the imbalanced power within us. When it's very, suppressed or ignored, that's what's running the back end programs of ourselves, of our mind.
That's what's running the show.
Exactly. So in that same way, it's as above, so below, micro, macro, we're individually, but also this entire universe is functioning in that way. Okay. So I don't think it's a war. I think it's just a lack of awareness. It's the rejection of consciousness. So when you become aware, that's it. That unawareness doesn't exist anymore. That's it. Yeah.
Right. So then it kind of takes care of itself.
It does. It should rebalance itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could share a little bit with the audience today about what it means to be a hybrid, and how, you found out that you were a hybrid when you learned more about being in this hybridization program as well. And, what should people know about hybrids? I personally have met two this weekend, and I think, you're very lovely people.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but I'm sure there's a lot of viewers out there who don't have this opportunity and haven't met any. So what can you share about that?
Yeah. Well, I'm in a hybrid too.
Yeah.
Cherie and company. It's interesting. In my journey, how I became aware of being a hybrid myself was through my regressions. And why is because I went back to my lineage and discovered that my lineage supposedly went through a Merovingian bloodline, which supposedly the Merovingian bloodline goes all the way back to Jesus in history. Now, at the moment, I was very surprised and shocked to hear that. And there's a part of you that wants to feel special in a way. But in reality, when you do research and you really understand the lineages and how lineages, developed on our planet, we all seed from certain main lineages.
So are we all hybrids?
So yes,
kind of?
Yes, we are all holding on to those lineages that have been genetically modified since the origin of life on this planet. And we're all basically a cocktail of DNA.
Right.
And we know that because we have star seeds. Most of us, some of us that have been doing work for a long time, maybe older souls per se, or souls that are more aware, become aware of their star seed self at some point in their life. And that's just you accessing information which is already within you.
Right.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
so that really helped me understand how I was a hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's certain distinct, you know, characteristics to the hybrid, and depending on where they're from, you know, Misha Johnston has a great book on this. Actually, she's here at the conference that talks about the different alien races and how those hybrid lineages manifest themselves in our characteristics. So, for example, let's say Pleiadians are more artistic, they're more giving, they're more, you know, service to the whole or the collective. You know, so little things like this that kind of highlight, and they're little fun ways to look at these expressions in us. But really, you know, I think we're all hybrids at the end of the day. And so it's not to say that we're not more special, but when we get to the point of deprogramming, again, it's like those layers that you're opening and discovering more about yourself, your hybrid self.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a really great way to put it, you know, because it again, I think it helps us look at like the whole picture and stops this like us against them mentality.
Yeah, and the other thing I really want to say is, for example, our children that are being born right now, a lot of them are really advanced beings. I mean, it's just incredible. You know, when we have the work of Mary Rodwell that talks about the hybrids that are being incarnated on this planet, these are children at the age of 6 that are talking about advanced physics.
Oh, wow.
You know, college level physics. So obviously they have some kind of ingrained information that is encoded within their DNA.
In their DNA,
You know, so we're coming into these beings. And that's the other part of the hybridization program that I didn't get to, is some of these higher vibrational frequencies are being reincarnated into the reincarnation cycle, and they come in as these children, right? They're hybridized. So it's a really complex thing that, you know, it's important for us to learn about it because it affects our lives, our children, how we're educating them. We're learning that the education system is no longer working.
No, it's not.
You know?
And we're so used to this old way of learning of like, read a book, pen to paper, go to this lecture, you know, like you have to like record it on your brain.
Yeah.
And now these kids are coming in who already have it recorded in their DNA.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they don't need
how do you
school
educate?
in the traditional way. They need to be taught in a new way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So these are things that as parents in our communities, this is why this kind of information is so important. It's you know, it's not things that we're going to talk about at the grocery lane, you know what I mean?
Right.
But we gotta be there to support the kids, because then the kids, we have a lot of depression, ADHD, that they classify it at ADHD, but it's just the new design of the child is different.
Right. And they're being drugged.
They're being drugged
with a lot of medication to dumb them down.
Exactly.
Sadly. Yeah.
So we need to create programs and education and community to help support these kids in their development.
And we need to create programs to support the parents.
Exactly.
Because the parents don't know what to do with these kids. They don't know how to contain their energy. They feel like their kids are just like too much to handle.
Exactly.
Yeah, because it's almost like a different... It's really a different generation.
It is,
you know,
completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hybrids is a really important topic.
Yeah.
Talk about that. Yeah.
So speaking of awareness, you were in a film that was a documentary called Extraordinary: The Seeding. And it's all about the hybridization program. I just saw it. I've seen it twice now. Can you share a little bit about how that timing... Because it feels like the timing of you becoming into your awareness and them making that film were pretty close together.
Extremely close. It was amazing. And thank you so much for watching it.
Yeah.
You know, for me, it happened so quickly. I mean, in 2017, I had my regression, and the massive amounts of information that came through and the awareness of the experiences that I had gone in the hybridization program really it was a paradigm shift. And I was having existential crisis, you know, because I was like, oh my God, how do I put this all together? And the realization that I could never go back to my old life. I had to talk to someone about it. And the first person I spoke to it was Lorian Fenton, who produced this show.
Right.
And she was the first person outside of my my father and mother that I could even share what had happened to me.
Okay.
And when I told her, she made me feel more comfortable. Like I wasn't just completely losing my mind, and it was through Lorian that connected me to Lori Wagner, the producer of the film, the director of the film, and the J3, J3 Films. So it just happened very organically. And I mean, I had no idea. And to be honest, when I was even asked to do the film, I don't think I quite registered what that really meant.
Right.
I was just thinking, I'm going to share the story and, whoever resonates with it, that's great. But looking at the bigger picture, it's really important. And the film was done very well. And I'm so grateful to the director for doing that, because they were able to highlight different aspects of the hybridization in a very elegant and a thorough way, I think,
Yeah, I mean, they went into a lot of detail and had a lot of really good graphics to help visualize the scenarios that happened on the ship, etc. And were some of those your drawings?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Cool. The ones of your
that
children?
look like 5-year-old kid drawing.
No, they were really good.
Yes, those are mine, of like the ETs, and several of them are put like into. Yeah.
And does the movie, in your opinion, do a pretty good job of showing like what happened on the ship?
Yeah, I mean,
or ships.
The story that I'm sharing there is a very small part of an experience that happened to me. I mean, I've been an abductee since the age of 5,
right?
And the actual insemination process happened multiple times in my life since the age of 16 up until, I'm going to say, 6-7 months ago, right? So, yes, it showed different facets of it, but there's so much more to talk about. There's so many questions that come from that.
Yeah.
And he did a good job highlighting possible scenarios. Like, for example, the experience that was shared there was a screen image scenario where they used their technology to look like a man.
Right.
But then, when you're in regression and you're getting a clear image of who you're actually with, it's actually a reptilian that is inseminating you or, working on you.
Right.
So it goes into some topics that are sometimes graphic and difficult to digest. But again, thousands of women and men around the world are experiencing this.
Right.
So we got to have the conversation.
Yeah, we have to talk about it. It's uncomfortable.
It is sometimes. I understand completely. Yeah.
Is there anything that you'd like to share today that maybe you didn't get a chance to share in the movie that, that could help our audience kind of not be there with you, but kind of like have a better picture of what you went through during any of those experiences?
Yeah, one of the things that I get asked a lot as a result of the film is, am I traumatized from what happened? And so the way I like to respond to that is the way that my awakening and awareness came into these things was kind of different in a sense from some other people, just for the fact that I had been working on deprogramming myself for many years.
Right.
And I was creating a very strong spiritual foundation. And so that kind of made it so that when I came across these kinds of things, I didn't feel violated in a sense. I had an awareness that, okay, we're all beings evolving with different consciousness and different perspective of how we're experiencing this current lifetime. And so for me, I never felt like I was being abused or violated. I think for me that those kinds of experiences came later when I was involved in military abductions, which is very different, which is a whole other topic.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
And so because those happened conscious as well, some of them, and that I really felt like is an infringement on myself.
Right.
And I don't know if that was a result of coming public with this information or a result of just what naturally happens when people come out with these topics.
When were you abducted by the military?
So this happened last year in Colorado. Very interesting. And, the way that it happened, it was 3 people that we were speaking at a conference. And I'll just tell you really briefly, like, the interesting parts of it is that I woke up at like 4 a.m,
Mm-hmm.
and I was sharing a room with 2 other experiencers with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I woke up screaming something, and my sweater was soaking wet. And I was like, oh, I didn't know what that was. And I was worried that I had woken my roommates up.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't think anything of it. I said, okay, nightmare. I take off my sweater. And the nightmare was that this gray was coming at me with a syringe this big with yellow liquid, inserting it into my arm.
Oh my goodness.
And I didn't even remember what I had screamed at waking up.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 days go by. I'm speaking the next day. On Sunday, we're hitting the road again, 10 hours back to Las Vegas from Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And on the road, I'm having another nightmare. So I'm starting to think, why am I getting these nightmares? Because I don't usually have nightmares and wake up abruptly.
Yeah.
And so I'm telling my friends that are with me, I begin to talk to her, and I'm like, I had the weirdest dream the other night, and I woke up. I hope I didn't wake you guys up when in the middle of the night. And she's like, actually, I was having a dream too, and I woke up just a minute before you were waking up. And I was like, okay. So then I start telling her what my dream was, and it turns out that we were in the same dream. And the interesting thing about hybrids, when I meet them, and I was talking to you about this the other day, was that we have telepathic communication with other hybrids. It's very interesting. Like when you talk to them, we speak in images, but also verbally. And this happened with her, and we started to realize that we were in the same place. It wasn't a dream. We were having a shared experience.
Wow.
And it wasn't until months later that we met the third person that had been taken with us. And I asked her if she had any strange experience, and she described, she's like, oh, the white van. And I was like, oh my God, yes, because we both had experienced a white van that had taken us 15 minutes away from where we were staying to an underground base.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow. So how does that happen? Like there's 3 people.
Mm-hmm.
Is it like, how do they shut you down so that they can take you and you don't remember these things? I know they do screen memories and things like that, but there's a physical thing happening in this case, right?
Yeah. I mean, what I'm understanding is that every contactee, person that has been abducted, we have implants already in our body, and they call it the switch, which is located here at the nape of the neck, which basically triggers the nervous system to go into sleep mode. Okay. And so as far as I know, this is what they use to do, and it moves really fast, but we're talking about men that are dressed in military, black.
So how do they get you out the door?
They just come in and take you out. I mean,
but how do they take you out of the hotel with nobody seeing you?
It was an Airbnb.
Oh,
and
so
it was in the
house.
middle of basically nowhere. I don't know if you've ever been to Colorado, but by Moffett, by Alien Highway. There's that place called Alien Highway.
Haven't been there yet.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. It's really interesting. And I've done a lot of research on that. There are military bases there.
Yes. Supposedly an underground base under the airport.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you near the airport?
No, we were not near the airport, but there's several bases in that exact area. So it just really makes you question, like, what's the purpose? And as a result of that experience, I mean, they had taken fluid from my spine to the point where I couldn't bend. I do yoga every day. I couldn't do yoga for 3 months after that.
Oh my!
I had excruciating pain.
Wow.
So this is where these kinds of experiences, they merge with reality. And this is something really important about the hybridization program, is that we're not just talking about dreams, visions of ETs. We're talking about physical symptoms that are affecting the life,
Right,
really.
right.
Yeah.
And if the ETs are the ones putting the switch, as you called it, the implant that can like shut off your nervous system, how do the MyLab guys have access to that?
Well, that's a great question. But I think that, you see, this is the thing. How many of my abductions were only ET?
Right. You don't know.
We don't. There are some telltale signs that tell us about that, and how we can identify or attempt to identify is in the environment and the tools that are being used. Right. When it's an extraterrestrial abduction, you're going to see more light. Supposedly, you're going to see it's more of that vibrational environment. Like I was mentioning, everything looks like it's energy. You can see through the craft. Yeah. And their technology is extremely advanced. When it's MyLab, you're looking at more of a dark environment. Sometimes musty smell. It literally smells like you're underground, or a hospital setting. and it's not like a metallic bed, like a cold metallic bed, which you would experience mainly in an extraterrestrial abduction. In a terrestrial kind of experience, you're looking more at something that looks like a dental chair or one of the, for gynecology, those kinds. So there's little things, details that you can kind of identify that will show you the differences. But these are going into pretty detailed things.
Right.
Getting really deep into the programs.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because every experiencer mentions that cold metallic bed on the ship. And I'm like, can someone just please tell them to get a mattress?
Listen, you guys.
Get a blanket. If you're going to take us, at least, make it comfortable for us. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. I did not realize that you had a MyLab experience.
Yeah.
As well. I mean, there's so much to talk about that we could cover, right?
That's true. And I think it's important to share. I mean, there was a point where I was reluctant to share that part. But to be honest, what I come to realize is that a lot of experiencers that come public with this stuff are going to be experiencing that.
Right.
And why is that happening?
Yeah.
That's an infringement on our free will too.
For sure.
So what are we running here?
Yeah, I know.
And who's running what?
It feels like they want to know everything that the ETs are doing, because even if there's a UFO or UAP sighting, here they come right after them, often with their jets or whatever.
And who's coming?
Right.
We need to keep a really close eye on who's coming and when, because sometimes I think organizations are quite intertwined with each other.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me and chatting and sharing so much of your story with us. It's been great having you on the show, and I'd like to have you back again in the future if you'd like to come back on the show.
I would love to come back. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing. You're amazing, Cherie, for the platform and your time. So thank you.
Thank you as well. You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you all for watching the show today. I'll put all of Geraldine's links in the description below. So please go check out her website, bayareameditation.com. And please like and share this video if you enjoyed watching this video today. Thank you. Bye.